Testimony of defendant Lori Ann Phillips. Yep, defendant took the stand. She's accused of a hit and run on her husband, Mark Phillips. The defendant calls 911 in the early morning hours. This is February 23rd in 2019, and says, I found my husband in this snowbank outside of our home. Authorities say when they got there, she's kneeling next to her husband's body. The prosecutors say that she killed her husband after this heated argument. They were out at a bar drinking, the dive bar. Phillips says, no, she slept in the truck after she left the scene after this argument that night. She comes home in the early morning hours, thinks he's upstairs in the bedroom or wherever the bedroom may be. She goes upstairs into another room to avoid him. Then when she wakes up a little later in the morning, goes outside, discovers his body in the snowbank. So if convicted, she's looking at up to 25 years in prison. Both sides have officially rested. Jury has been instructed. Closing arguments began just moments ago. So let's head into the courtroom now and take a listen.
Please the court, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, congratulations. We have made it to the end of the presentation. You have heard the cases of both sides. The evidence is in, and now closing remarks, as the judge had indicated. This is an opportunity for me to tell you about my case, but most importantly to prove what I have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. I have an opportunity to go through the evidence that's been admitted. The judge has instructed you about evidence. I'm going to tell you and argue to you what I think is persuasive, or in terms of what you should find, what you should consider, and I'm going to use that to kind of bear my burden and talk about why the state believes and is arguing to you that we have met our burden beyond a reasonable doubt. And then because I have the burden of proof, I get what's called a rebuttal after Attorney Zacher and the defense's argument, and that will be the conclusion of this trial pending your deliberations and instructions. So judge had indicated that this is a reckless homicide case. I wanted to start off with the elements that I have to prove and how we kind of think we get there. The first one is cause. So I have to show to you that Miss Phillips actions was a substantial cause in the death of Mr. Phillips. So what is the cause of death here? This. Whoops. The 2019 Dodge Ram that Miss Phillips had driven on the night of February 22nd when she left her driveway that night. And so now that, in terms of knowing that that is a substantial factor given what we had seen, that is our theory on cause, that the death of Mr. Phillips was caused by that 2019 Dodge Ram. How do we know that? This is a clip from Dr. Reichert's autopsy report. It wasn't known at the time when the investigators got there, when they were on scene, when they started doing things, but this is a snippet of Dr. Reichert's testimony. And I'm using the laser pointer to highlight the third paragraph, and I won't get in, we saw the pictures, we saw the details, but significant injuries, the blunt force injuries of the torso, the blunt force injuries of the extremities, including the upper limbs, left deltoid, etc. You heard evidence about the subdermal hematoma, you heard about our brain bleed, you heard about the 3 to 9 multiple compound cracked ribs. You heard that they were on the left side. You heard Dr. Reichert talk about how he ruled out other causes. And in many ways, Dr. Reichert is getting to his determination and how he's looking at the evidence in the same way we kind of talked about at the very beginning of the case when we were circumstantial evidence, ruling out process of elimination, ruling out causes, getting to a determination of what the cause of death was, by excluding all other things that couldn't be the cause of death. Dr. Reichert testified to you that it was a crushing injury on Mr. Phillips, a compression type injury that ultimately caused Mr. Phillips' death. That death could have been caused by a combination of the significant amount of blood in the chest cavity as it compressed Mr. Phillips' lungs and the brain bleed that I had just talked about. So, Dr. Reichert also testified in terms of the things that could cause Mr. Phillips' death, in that it was significant enough that we can start ruling off common household injuries, other things. This isn't, he's found in the snow, not hypothermia. The injuries are too severe. This is not a slip and fall. Mr. Phillips, from a standing position, could not have slipped on some ice and fallen in the position that you later saw him, because the injuries are too severe. They're too significant. The blunt force trauma is too much. Mr. Phillips, in terms of that, and Dr. Reichert had testified that his injuries are consistent, again, with it being crushed by something, a very large, heavy object. Based on what we heard in the rest of the case, there is only one possible, and I will argue further, but only one possible culprit of that particular injuries, and we can rule out a lot of the other things that you might think. The other possibility that Dr. Reichert had testified to as far as what could cause a crushing injury like that, he did say that a fall from a significant height, if someone, in this case Mr. Phillips, were to have landed exclusively on his left side, that could have been similar. The amount of force generated by hitting the, in this case, pavement, could have caused the significant fracturing in the subdermal hematoma. So how do we know it's the truck? And how do we know it was the truck driven by Ms. Phillips? And how do we know that it was the truck driven by Ms. Phillips on February 22nd, 2019? Starting off here, the laser pointer, this is a silhouette of the truck. Where it was when Ms. Phillips brought it home, and she testified, or she indicated to Investigator Leinfelder that, you know, she hadn't moved the truck. It was there. That's how she parked it. All the pictures we saw early on in this case of the position of the truck in the driveway before it was put on the flatbed tow, that's, you know, that's where it was. But most importantly, we know she got there before it started snowing. Lisa Knutson, as part of her duties as deputy medical examiner, told you that she looked up things like ambient weather conditions and the weather conditions leading up to the morning of. It began snowing at about 2:15. It accumulated about 0.15 inches. She observed that it was about 31 degrees Fahrenheit when she arrived at the next day. In terms of the snow, so, and we see exactly that the outline of the truck, Ms. Phillips, and that's consistent with her statement as well, that she, when she disengaged the camera, she got home, it was about the 2 range. We saw other evidence relating to the home Wi-Fi when it was accessed. So Ms. Phillips gets to the home later before it snows, and then based on Deputy Examiner Knutson's report, that is a little bit after. Yep.
I'm sorry, I should have given the warning that there's a body being displayed.
This is the position of Mr. Phillips in the snowbank. I will hurry through this one because it is sensitive. That is the positioning of his body. We know that this is important because we can see the snow that's covering him on the legs, namely there. We can infer from that that Mr. Phillips arrived in that location before it started snowing. Go ahead. This is a picture of the side of the house. We see the 2 large windows that Ms. Phillips had let us know is the, I guess, the dining room is somewhere in there, but that was where the light had kind of come out of. But that's the 2 large windows we were talking about. That's the front of the house. Up there, that's the camera on what I've been referring to as the W driveway. I submit this picture to you because if you thought that maybe Mr. Phillips, you know, Dr. Reichert said a significant fall, Attorney Burdick, you have to prove to me the cause here. The state bears that burden, and I do. That is an inhuman jump. There is an inhuman jump. If Mr. Phillips were to somehow be in that tree you see in the top there, or the top of the roof,
Okay, we're in closing arguments now in this case against Lori Ann Phillips, and it's a hit and run case. So the question really becomes, despite what we're hearing in this closing, did she know that she hit something? In this case, turns out to be her husband, Mark Phillips, and he ultimately died as a result. Even if all that's true, that he died as a result, did she know she hit him? Catherine Lizardo is here, and Lara Uretzian. So let me ask you, Catherine, I'm assuming we're going there, but it seems we're spending a lot of time on things we can, even if we assume they're true, don't necessarily mean this defendant is guilty.
We are, and the closing of the prosecution, it's a little bit hard to follow, but because he's talking about the weather and the snow, I think I can't really tell what he's thinking, but I think he's saying that because if the defendant drove away and didn't feel any bump or that she hit her husband, how could that possibly be when there's no snow or any obstruction on the road? Because at the time of the death and the alleged hit and run.
And again, trying to rule out any other possibility. So, Lara, I think, you tell me what you think here. The guy seems to be relying on the jury just using common sense, saying anybody would have realized they ran into something large like a big animal or a human and would have checked, would have stopped, wouldn't have just driven off.
Right. I mean, he can ask them to rely on their common sense, and maybe he's right, but it's going to come down to the jury and how well the defendant did on the witness stand in this case. And if the jury believes her, then they believe her. And it is possible for someone not to realize it. You know, she did admit that she'd also been drinking, so there's other factors that come into play, and it is possible that for whatever reason she didn't realize it. It could happen. And the reasonable doubt could be there. It all depends again on whether this jury believed her and how good she did on the witness stand.
Yeah, I mean, it's really going to come down to if they believe that she could not have understood what she did. Otherwise, it ain't hit and run. It's an unfortunate accident. Taking a break, coming back. Again, closing arguments underway in La Crosse, Wisconsin. We'll be right back.